The morning Cora nearly died, she was thinking about bread. Not survival, not fate, not the way the moon had hung too low and too red over the Ashvale Mountains the night before. Just bread. Whether the kitchen at the Silverstone Inn had restocked the rye loaves, whether she would have time to eat before the breakfast crowd arrived, whether her boots would hold together for one more week before the sole finally separated entirely from the leather. Small thoughts. Ordinary thoughts. The kind that belong to a woman whose life has been built entirely from small, ordinary things. She did not know, as she tied her apron strings in the dim corridor behind the inn's main hall, that ordinary was about to end forever. The Silverstone Inn sat at the edge of Dawnmere, a border town that smelled perpetually of pine resin, horse dung, and the cold mineral sharpness of the river that cut through it from the northern mountains. It was the kind of place travelers passed through but never stayed. Merchants, soldiers, messengers, and sometimes, when the roads were bad, nobility who resented every moment they spent beneath a roof that wasn't their own. Cora had worked there since she was 19, pouring ale and carrying plates, and learning to make herself invisible when the wrong kind of man walked through the door. She was 23 now, and invisibility had become a skill as natural as breathing. She was not Pack. That was the first thing anyone noticed about her, the thing that settled over every introduction like a cold draft under a door. No Pack, no wolf, no rank, no scent marker beyond her own plain human smell of soap and wood smoke. In a town that sat at the border of 3 shifter territories, being human and unaffiliated was its own particular kind of vulnerability. She had learned to carry it quietly. The hall was still half dark when she pushed through the kitchen door, the fire in the hearth already built up by old Petta, the cook, whose arthritic hands moved with miraculous speed when bread dough was involved. The smell of yeast and scorched wood filled the low-ceilinged room, and Cora felt something in her chest loosen the way it always did in the kitchen. This one small place in the world where she was simply competent and calm and needed. She arrived late last night, Petta said, without looking up from the dough she was folding. Her voice was careful, the way it got when she was saying something that required care. The old woman. Room 4. Came in a plain carriage, no insignia, but Dort said the horses were King's breed, northern stock. Cora paused, a stack of linen napkins in her hands. King's breed. Dort knows horses. She did not ask which king. There was only one king whose horses anyone in a border town would lower their voice to mention. Caius of the Ashvale throne, Alpha King of the Northern Reaches, sovereign of 7 packs, ruler of more territory than any wolf lord had held in 3 generations. The kind of name that made innkeepers straighten their backs and made border soldiers check their uniforms. Even here, 2 days' ride from the capital, his name carried weight that pressed against the air. What does she look like? Cora asked. Old, Petta said flatly. Fine bones, white hair. Holds herself like she was born expecting doors to open for her. A pause. Be careful with her, and don't ask questions. Cora nodded and said nothing more. She had learned, a long time ago, that questions cost more than they returned. The woman in room 4 was already awake when Cora brought the morning tray up. Warm broth, sliced dark bread, a small pot of honey, and the pressed chamomile tea that the register noted the guest had requested the night before. She knocked twice, waited, and entered when the voice that answered was calm and unhurried, and entirely accustomed to being obeyed. The room was modest by any standard, but the woman inside occupied it as though it were a throne room. She sat upright in the chair beside the window, dressed in a wool gown of deep gray, her white hair pinned simply at the back of her neck. Her face was carved in the particular way of old women who had once been extraordinary. The beauty was still there, rearranged into something more severe and more interesting. Her eyes, when they moved to Cora, were very pale and very sharp. Set it on the table, she said. Cora did. She poured the tea without being asked, kept her movements unhurried, and did not stare. She had learned that people of rank were watched too much, and it made them rigid. Being unobtrusive was a form of respect they rarely received. "You're human," the woman said. "Yes, my lady." "Unaffiliated?" "Yes." The pale eyes studied her for a moment with something that wasn't quite assessment and wasn't quite sympathy. "What is your name?" "Cora, my lady." "Sit down, Cora." It was not a request. Cora sat, folding her hands in her lap, and waited while the woman, whose name she still did not know, wrapped both hands around the teacup and looked out the window at the gray Dawnmere morning. "I am traveling incognito," the woman said. "I trust you understand what that means in practical terms." "That I haven't seen you, my lady." A faint sound that might have been approval. "My son does not know I left the capital. He would have sent an escort, and an escort would have made this journey impossible." She took a slow sip of tea, and Cora noticed that her hands, though steady, carried the careful deliberateness of hands that sometimes shook. "I am 72 years old, and I have spent 40 of those years inside walls that other people chose for me. I wanted 2 days of choosing my own road." She set the cup down. "I don't expect you to understand that." "I think I do," Cora said, quietly. "My lady." The pale eyes returned to her. Something shifted in them. A reassessment, small but real. "Then you may go," the woman said. "And you may come back at midday with whatever the kitchen makes best." Midday brought venison stew and a cold wind from the north that rattled the inn's shutters and sent the stable boys scrambling to relatch the barn doors. The common room filled early, travelers pulling ahead of the weather, merchants grumbling about the road conditions, 2 local farmers nursing ale at the corner table who had no intention of going anywhere. Cora moved between them with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to read a room the way a scout reads terrain. She noted the farmers, the merchants, the young couple near the fire who were pretending not to be afraid of something. She noted the 3 men who came in just past midday and sat at the table nearest the stairs. She noticed them the way she noticed things that were wrong without being obviously wrong. They ordered ale, but did not drink. They sat with their backs to the wall, which travelers did, but their eyes moved to the stairs at regular intervals, which travelers didn't. Their cloaks were plain, deliberately plain, the kind of plain that required effort. And they smelled. She had spent enough time around shifters to know the scent of suppressed aggression, that particular metallic sharpness beneath the wood smoke and wool, like wolves who were working very hard to appear as though they were not. She brought their ale. She smiled. She retreated to the kitchen and said to Peta very quietly, "The woman in room 4. Is there another way up?" Peta looked at her for one long moment. Then she pointed to the back staircase. Cora took the tray and went up the back way. She was 3 steps from room 4 when she heard the door open from the inside and saw the woman in gray step into the corridor, wrapped in her wool cloak, apparently intending to come down for her meal herself. Cora opened her mouth to say something, to warn her, to redirect her. She wasn't certain yet, when the door at the far end of the hall swung open and the 3 men came through it. They had not used the front stairs. The woman in gray saw them and went very still in the way of someone who has been threatened before and knows that stillness is the first survival instinct. Her pale eyes swept the corridor. She was calculating. She was not afraid, or not visibly, but she was calculating. Cora stopped calculating and moved. She stepped in front of the woman, full and complete, her back to the old lady, her body a wall of linen and wool, and no armor whatsoever, facing 3 shifter males who were already drawing weapons, not claws, which she had expected, but small iron pistols of the kind border territory enforcers used, made for close range, made to put someone down fast and quiet. The first shot hit her left shoulder. The second caught her side, below the ribs. She was still standing, She did not know how. The third and fourth came together, one high on the same shoulder, one grazing the upper left arm. And then she was not standing anymore. She was sliding down against the doorframe of room 4, and the old woman was crouching over her, saying something sharp and furious, and there was shouting from downstairs and the smell of blood. Her blood, copper and warm, spreading through the cold corridor air. Her last coherent thought before the gray closed in was absurd, and she knew it was absurd even as she thought it. She had never found out if they'd restocked the rye bread. She did not die. That was the first surprising thing. The second was that she woke up warm. Cora had spent enough winters in a servant's room at the back of the Silverstone Inn to know that warmth, real warmth, the kind that reached the bones and stayed there, was not something that happened to her by accident. It had to be earned, negotiated. An extra blanket bartered for a favor, a spot near the kitchen hearth claimed early before the other staff arrived. Warmth did not simply surround her, and yet it did now, pressing in from every side like something deliberate. She opened her eyes to a ceiling she did not recognize. Stone, but carved. Not the rough gray stone of the inn, or the pale plaster of the rooms she had slept in her entire life. This was dark stone cut with faint geometric patterns along the edges, the kind of detail that existed not because it was necessary, but because someone had decided that beauty was necessary. A single candle burned on a stand near the bed, and beyond it, heavy curtains of deep charcoal wool blocked whatever light existed outside. She tried to sit up. Her body had opinions about that. The pain arrived in waves. First the dull, enormous ache of her left shoulder, then the sharper, meaner bite below her ribs, then a general insistence from her entire left side that she had made a catastrophic error and should reconsider all future decisions. She made a small sound that she would not have called a cry, pressed her right hand flat against the mattress, and did not sit up. The mattress was real linen. She noticed that even through the pain, because her mind catalogued comfort the way it catalogued danger, automatically, without permission. Don't. The voice came from the corner of the room, and Cora turned her head slowly, carefully, toward it. The woman in gray was sitting in a chair beside the hearth, a blanket across her lap, a small book open in her hands that she was no longer reading. Her white hair was loose now, falling past her shoulders, and without the careful pins, she looked both older and softer. Her pale eyes were fixed on Cora, with an expression that was not easy to name. Relief, perhaps, but a kind of relief that had already hardened into something more complex. "You've been unconscious for nearly 2 days," the woman said. "The physician extracted all 4 shots. He said you should not have survived the second one." A pause. He said that with the particular tone physicians use when they want you to understand that they are not responsible for whatever happens next. Cora absorbed this. 2 days. 4 shots extracted. Should not have survived. "Where am I?" she asked. Her voice came out rougher than she expected, scraped raw. "Ashvale," the woman said simply. "The capital." She was in the capital. She had never been to the capital. "My name," the woman said, closing the book with a soft sound, "is Maren, and I believe we have been introduced under circumstances that make formal courtesy somewhat beside the point." Something moved in her pale eyes. Not quite humor, but close to it. "You stepped in front of 4 bullets intended for me. I think you have earned the right to know my surname." Cora waited. "Maren Vile," the woman said. "Mother of Caius Vale, Alpha King of the Northern Reaches." The room was very quiet. The candle flame bent slightly, some draft from under the door catching it, and the shadow on the ceiling shifted and settled. "I see," Cora said, because it was the only thing she had. "My son," Maren continued, "arrived at Dawnmere approximately 6 hours after the attack. He had been informed by his intelligence network, which is extensive and which I confess I had underestimated, that I had left the capital without escort. Her voice was dry, but beneath the dryness was something that sounded like guilt, carefully contained. He arrived in time to find you in the physician's care, already transferred from the inn. He made arrangements for your transport here. A brief pause. He was not calm about any of it. Cora thought about what not calm might look like, attached to a man who held 7 packs and 3 generations of territorial dominance. She decided not to think about it too hard. "He will want to see you when you are well enough," Marin said. I told him that would not be today. Something in her voice made it clear that this had not been a suggestion she had offered her son so much as an instruction she had delivered. "Rest. There is broth on the stand beside you. Drink it when you can." She stood, and Cora saw that she moved carefully, the way people moved when pain was a familiar companion they had learned to manage rather than acknowledge. She crossed to the door, paused with her hand on the frame. "Cora," she said. "My lady. You didn't know who I was when you stepped in front of those men." It was not a question. Cora answered it anyway. "No, my lady." Marin was quiet for a moment. "That," she said finally, "is the part my son cannot stop thinking about." She opened the door and left without waiting for a response. The broth was lamb, rich with herbs Cora couldn't name, and she drank all of it sitting upright against the pillows, because lying down made her feel like she was surrendering to something. Her left side ached with a constancy that had already become almost companionable. She inventoried her body the way she inventoried a supply room, methodically, without drama: shoulder, ribs, arm. The bandages were clean and well applied, tighter than she would have expected from a border town physician, which meant someone here had redressed them. Someone careful. She looked at the room properly for the first time. It was not a servant's room. That was the first clear fact. The bed had 4 posts of dark wood and curtains that could be drawn for privacy, and the mattress beneath her was the kind that existed in a register of comfort, so far above her usual experience that she felt vaguely guilty occupying it. There was a writing table near the window, a wardrobe of polished wood, a dressing screen behind which she could see the edge of a copper basin. A fire in the hearth burned steadily, fed from a woodpile that someone had clearly stacked that morning. On the writing table, a folded set of clothes. Not her clothes. She had none. She'd come here in whatever she'd been wearing when she fell. But a simple linen sleeping gown and a wool robe, both clean, both folded with the precision of someone who had been told to take care. She was being taken care of. The unfamiliarity of it sat in her chest like a stone that didn't quite hurt, just pressed. He came on the 3rd day. She was sitting up in the chair by the window when she heard the knock. 2 sharp raps, the kind that gave permission rather than asked for it, but stopped before entering nonetheless. She had been watching the courtyard below, where she could see the shape of the castle's inner walls, the guards in dark leather moving their patrol routes, the pale morning light on stone that had stood for centuries. She had been thinking, methodically, about what happened to a woman in her position. No pack, no rank, no family with influence, no resources, when the woman she had apparently saved turned out to be the Alpha King's mother. She had not yet reached a conclusion she liked. "Come in," she said. The door opened, and the room changed. That was the only way she could describe it later, in the private accounting she made of that moment. The room simply changed, the way a room changes when a fire is lit in a cold hearth, or when a storm front moves over the sky. The quality of the air altered, the proportions shifted. She was aware, suddenly and precisely, of exactly how small she was. Not in a cruel way, not a diminishing, just a simple recalibration of scale. Caius Vile was not what she had imagined. She had imagined something like a weapon. Hard, cold, designed entirely for one purpose. What walked through the door was more complicated than that. He was tall in the way of men who have never learned to make themselves smaller for doorways, broad through the shoulders in the way of shifters who spent more time in fur than most, with dark braided hair pulled back from a face that was angular and watchful, and, at this moment, absolutely unreadable. He wore no formal garments: a dark linen shirt, leather bracers, boots that had seen actual road use. There was a scar at the corner of his jaw, fine and old, the kind left by something that had decided to leave a signature. His eyes were the color of deep water in winter. They found her immediately and did not move. He stood just inside the door and said nothing for a moment that stretched long enough to become its own kind of statement. "You're sitting up," he said finally. "I am," Cora agreed. He crossed the room, not toward her directly, but to the chair on the other side of the hearth, which he pulled out and sat in with the unhurried ease of someone who understood that taking up space was his right, without needing to perform it. He rested his arms on his knees and looked at her steadily. "How much pain?" he asked. The bluntness of it caught her off guard. She had expected formality, gratitude in official language, perhaps a speech, not a direct question delivered like a physician's inquiry. "Manageable," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him. He looked back. The winter water eyes gave nothing away, but they were paying full attention, and full attention from a man like this was its own form of pressure. "Considerable," she amended, "but not unmanageable." Something in his expression shifted almost imperceptibly. Not softness. She wasn't sure softness was in his range, but acknowledgement. He had heard the distinction she was making and had filed it accurately. "The men who attacked," he said. 3 were captured. 1 did not survive the encounter. He paused. "My encounter." Cora did not ask what that meant. She understood what it meant. "Do you know who sent them?" she asked. His eyes sharpened slightly. A flicker of something, not surprise exactly, but recalibration. She had the impression he had expected a different kind of question. Something about herself, her future. What would happen to her now? Not about the attackers. "I have a theory," he said carefully. "Not yet a certainty." "But you suspect someone?" "Yes." She nodded and looked back at the window, and for a moment the room held them both in its quiet. The fire, the pale light, the weight of everything that had happened, and everything that hadn't been said yet. "My mother tells me," Kaya said, "that you did not know who she was." "No," Cora said. "I didn't." "She told me that also." Another pause. "I wanted to hear it from you." She turned back to him. His face was still unreadable, but there was something beneath the surface of it. Something she couldn't name yet. Something that moved like deep water moves, invisible from above. "I saw 3 men with weapons pointed at an old woman," Cora said simply. That was enough. He was quiet for a long moment. "Yes," he said. "I imagine it was." He stood then, and the room recalibrated again around his movement. He looked at her once more from his full height, and for just a moment she had the disorienting sensation of being seen. Not assessed, not categorized, but actually seen, in the way that very rarely happened and always cost something. "Rest," he said. "We will speak again when you are stronger." He left, and the door closed with the same quiet precision with which he did everything, and Cora sat in the chair by the window and stared at the courtyard below and tried to understand why the room felt smaller now that he was gone from it. She did not have an answer. She told herself that was fine. For now. It was not entirely fine. The theory Caius had mentioned became a certainty on the 5th day. Cora knew this not because anyone told her directly, but because she had spent 3 years learning to read the Silverstone Inn by its sounds and silences, and a castle, she was discovering, was not so different. It had its own acoustics, its own rhythm of footsteps and doors and voices that told you, if you listened with the right kind of attention, what the people inside it were feeling. and on the 5th morning, the rhythm changed. She heard it first in the corridor outside her room, boots moving faster than protocol, the clipped exchange of 2 guards who were trying to speak quietly and failing, the particular silence that followed a door being shut with controlled force rather than ordinary care. Then, from somewhere deeper in the castle, a voice she had learned to identify by its cadence alone, low and precise, and carrying the kind of authority that did not need volume. Caius was angry, not loudly. That, she suspected, was what made it worse. Marin came to see her mid-morning, and her pale eyes had the careful steadiness of someone who had decided in advance what she would and would not say. "There have been developments," Marin said, settling into the chair across from Cora, with her usual composed deliberateness. "I gathered," Cora said. Marin looked at her with something close to approval. "The men who were captured have given names, one name in particular." She paused, smoothing a crease in her wool skirt with one hand. "Lord Edric Vane, head of the Vane Pack, Eastern Territory." Her voice was even, but the evenness required effort. "He has been a member of the King's Council for 11 years. Cora absorbed this. A council member. Someone who sat in formal session with Caius, who swore loyalty in public ceremony, who had access to the rhythms and schedules of the royal household. "He knew you would be traveling," Cora said. "He knew because I mentioned it," Marin said quietly. "In a private correspondence I believed was secure, to a woman I believed was my friend, Lady Vane, Edric's wife." Something passed across her face, not quite grief, too composed for that, but the shape grief leaves behind when it has already been processed into something harder. 40 years of friendship. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind had picked up, moving across the high windows with a sound like breath. "I'm sorry," Cora said. Marin looked at her directly. "Don't be sorry for me. Be sorry for the foolishness of trusting someone simply because time had passed." Her jaw tightened briefly. "That is a lesson I should have learned before my 7th decade." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Marin said, more quietly, "Caius is convening the council today. Edric Vane will be called to answer formally." A pause. "My son does not make mistakes in council chambers, but he is also not entirely steady at the moment." Her pale eyes moved to Cora with a precision that felt deliberate. "He has not slept properly since Dawnmere." Cora said nothing to that. She wasn't sure what could be said, or what she was supposed to do with the information. "I tell you only so that you understand," Marin said, "why he may be more," she considered her word, "direct than usual when he speaks with you today." "He's coming today?" "He comes every day," Marin said, with the mild tone of someone stating an obvious fact. "Did you not know that?" "He came in the afternoon, when the light through the high windows had gone from pale gray to the amber gray of early dusk. He was still in his council clothes, a dark tunic with the veil emblem at the collar, leather bracers, the formal sword belt he had apparently not yet removed. There was a tension across his shoulders that had not been there on the 3rd day, a coiled quality to the way he moved, controlled, but close to the surface. He sat in the same chair as before. He looked at her with the same winter water eyes. And then, without preamble, he said, "Edric Vane claims the order was only to frighten her, that the men exceeded their instructions." His voice was flat. "He is lying. The weapons used are not the weapons of men sent to frighten." "No," Cora agreed. "They're not." He looked at her. "You know weapons. I know what 4 shots fired at close range in a narrow corridor means," she said. "It doesn't mean frighten." Something moved in his jaw. "No, it does not." He was quiet for a moment, his forearms resting on his knees, looking at the fire rather than at her. "He will be removed from council. His pack lands will be investigated. If the evidence supports a charge of conspiracy against the royal family..." He paused. The consequences will be what the law requires. And will the evidence support it? He looked back at her. Yes. The certainty in that single syllable was not cruelty. It was simply precision. A man who knew the difference between what he wished were true and what was true, and had learned to speak only in the latter currency. Cora studied him for a moment, the strong lines of his profile against the amber firelight, the scar at his jaw, the careful way he held himself even now, even tired. She had been watching him across 3 visits with the same instinct she used to watch the common room at the Silverstone, cataloging, reading, trying to understand what was real beneath what was performed. She still wasn't entirely sure, with him, where performance ended. "What happens to me?" she asked. He turned to look at her fully. The question did not seem to surprise him. "You remain here," he said, "until you are healed. After that—" He stopped, and for just a moment, the careful surface of him showed something beneath it, a fissure, a place where the control did not reach quite all the way. "After that, I would like to discuss something with you, but not until you are well." "I am well enough to discuss things now," she said. "You are well enough to sit up and drink broth," he said, with a precision that was not unkind. "That is not the same thing." She considered arguing. She looked at his face, the exhaustion he was carrying without acknowledging, the tension in his shoulders, the way he had been running on something harder than rest for days, and decided, without fully understanding why, not to push. "All right," she said. He nodded once, as if she had confirmed something he needed confirmed. On the 7th day, she walked to the window unaided, and on the 8th she walked to the door, and on the 9th, Marin came to tell her that a set of proper clothes had been arranged and that if she felt able, she was invited, and the word invited carried the particular weight of an invitation that has the texture of an expectation, to join the family for an evening meal. The clothes were simple, but well made, a dress of deep green wool, a belt of brown leather, soft boots that fit as though someone had taken careful note of the size of her feet at some point without her awareness. She braided her blonde hair the way she always did, a single plait down her back, and looked at herself in the small polished mirror above the dressing table. She looked like herself. That was both a relief and its own kind of strange, here in this carved stone room in the Alpha King's castle, wearing clothes someone had chosen for her. The dining room was smaller than she had imagined. Not a great hall, not a formal space, but a room with a long table that could seat 12 but was set for 3 tonight, firelight warm on dark wood, the smell of roasted meat and something herbed, and the beeswax of the candles overhead. Marin was already seated. Caius stood near the far window, still in his day clothes, and turned when Cora entered. He looked at her for a moment, one long, unreadable moment, and then pulled out the chair across from his mother without being asked, and said very simply, "Sit, please." It was the please that caught her. Small word. She suspected it was a word he did not produce carelessly. Dinner was quiet in the way of people who are learning each other's rhythms, rather than filling silence for the sake of it. Marin spoke of small things, the gardens, a letter from someone in the Western Territory, the behavior of the castle's elderly hound, who had apparently decided that Cora's room was now his preferred sleeping location, and had been found there twice by the morning servants. Caius listened more than he spoke. He ate with the focused efficiency of someone who forgets to eat when left to their own inclinations. And Cora had the distinct impression that Marin had arranged this dinner specifically to ensure he sat down and consumed an actual meal. She watched this dynamic without comment. The aging mother and the sovereign son, and the specific, wordless fluency they had developed across decades of knowing each other. There was love there. Not the performed decorative kind. The kind that survived disappointment and fear and 40 years of complicated geography. She felt, unexpectedly and painfully, the absence of something corresponding in herself. A brother. The thought arrived like a draft under a door, cold and uninvited. She pushed it away. Now was not the time. After the meal, when Marin had retired and the servants had cleared and the fire had burned lower, Caius set down his wine cup and looked across the table at her. "You have a brother," he said. The accuracy of it hit her like a hand pressed flat against a bruise. "How do you know that?" she asked quietly. "I had your background examined," he said. No apology in it, but also no attempt to make it sound smaller than it was. Standard procedure when someone enters this household. I wanted to know who you were. She should have expected this. He was the Alpha King. Of course he had looked. Of course there were people whose entire purpose was to look, when he asked them to. The understanding of this did not make it feel less like a violation of something she had kept very close. "His name is Finn," she said, before she'd made the decision to say it. The name in her mouth felt like setting down something heavy. "He's 20. He was taken by the Grey Hollow Pack 3 years ago for debt our father left when he died." Her voice was level. She had learned to say it levelly. "Pack law permits labor bond for inherited debt. He has 2 more years on his contract." Caius was watching her with that full, unmoving attention that she still hadn't quite learned to bear comfortably. "Grey Hollow is an Eastern Territory pack," he said. "Yes." "Edric Vane's territory." The realization moved through her slowly at first and then all at once, and she felt the blood leave her face in a wave she couldn't control. Edric Vane. The man who had sent 4 men to kill Marin in a border town corridor. The man whose territory held her brother's labor bond. The man who was, at this moment, facing the formal consequences of conspiring against the crown. The world was very small and very terrible sometimes. "Finn," Caius said, and her brother's name in his mouth was careful, deliberate, as if he understood the weight of it. "I will find out his current condition." He paused. "I cannot make promises yet about what is possible, but I will find out." She looked at him across the table, in the low firelight, and the careful distance she had been maintaining. The measured, self-protective space between gratitude and something more dangerous shifted slightly, not collapsed, just shifted. "Why?" she asked, not suspiciously, just honestly. He held her gaze for a moment. "Because you stepped in front of 4 bullets for my mother," he said, "without knowing her name, and because no one should have to carry what you're carrying alone." He picked up his wine cup, looked into it briefly, set it back down. "And because I am the Alpha King of 7 packs, and a 20-year-old boy should not still be in labor bond for a dead man's debt in my territory." The fire crackled. Outside, the wind moved across the castle walls with its perpetual northern insistence. "Thank you," Cora said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of that. Caius nodded once, and looked back at the fire, and said nothing more. But he did not leave immediately, and neither did she. And the silence between them was no longer entirely the silence of strangers. Finn was alive. Caius told her on the 11th day, standing in the doorway of the library where she had been spending her mornings. A vast, high-ceilinged room that smelled of old leather and pine resin, and the particular dusty warmth of books that had been read many times by many hands. She had found it by accident, following a corridor too far on one of her slow recovery walks, and had stopped in the doorway the way she sometimes stopped in the kitchen at the inn. That same loosening in the chest, that same quiet recognition of a place where she could simply be. No one had told her she couldn't use it. She had decided to interpret that silence as permission. She was sitting in a chair near the window with a history of the Northern Pack territories open in her lap, not reading it exactly, more letting her eyes move across the pages while her mind did other work. When she heard his step in the corridor, she had learned his step by then. It had a particular quality, unhurried and deliberate, that announced itself differently from the guards or the servants, or even Marin, who moved with her own careful precision. He came to the doorway and stopped. "He's in reasonable health," Caius said, "thinner than he should be. The work is hard, but he has not been harmed." A pause. "I have his bond documents." She closed the book. Her hands were perfectly steady, and she did not understand how. "You have them," she said. "Edric Vane's assets are under Crown review pending the conspiracy investigation. That includes all active labor bonds issued under Grey Hollow Pack authority." He crossed the room and set a folded document on the table beside her chair. The seal on it was broken. Already broken, she noticed. The wax split clean. "His bond is dissolved. He will be escorted here within the week." She looked at the document. She looked at it for a long time without touching it. "I don't know how to—" she started. "You don't need to," he said, not unkindly. With the same even precision he applied to everything, but without the coldness that precision could sometimes carry. She picked up the document and held it, and felt the weight of 3 years compress into the paper between her fingers. 3 years of sending what coins she could through merchants traveling east. 3 years of calculating how much longer. 3 years of carrying his name like a second heartbeat, quiet and constant and slightly painful. She did not cry. She had learned a long time ago to process things in a different order than tears, to let the feeling settle first and find its edges before she let it move through her. But her throat tightened in a way she couldn't entirely control, and she kept her eyes on the document until she was certain her face was composed. When she looked up, Caius was watching her with that winter water steadiness that she had come to understand was not distance but its opposite, a kind of attention so concentrated it had learned to look like stillness. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. He did not say it was nothing, or that she deserved it, or any of the things that would have been easy to say. She had noticed that about him. He did not fill spaces with convenient words. He simply said what was true and left the rest alone. He sat down in the chair across from hers. The library had a pair of reading chairs arranged near the window, and he occupied the second one with the same natural ease with which he occupied all spaces, as though rooms arranged themselves around him without being asked. "I want to speak with you about something," he said. "All right." He was quiet for a moment, looking at the window. The morning light came through the high glass in long pale shafts, and in that light the scar at his jaw was very visible, a fine silver line against the darker tan of his skin. "The council is in a difficult position," he said. 3 of the remaining 11 members have direct alliance ties to the Vane Pack. Their loyalty is uncertain. The investigation into Edric Vane has exposed certain— A brief pause. A word chosen carefully. Structural vulnerabilities in how the council operates, in how information moves, in who has access to what. She listened. She was not sure yet why he was telling her this. "My mother's journey was known because someone close to her passed information to someone close to Vane," he continued. "That chain is broken now, but the habit that allowed it, the assumption that intimacy equals loyalty, is a vulnerability I cannot afford to repeat." He looked back at her, and there was something in his expression she hadn't seen there before, something that cost him something to show. "I have advisors who are strategically brilliant and personally untrustworthy. I have guards who are physically capable and cognitively rigid. I have council members who understand pack law and understand nothing else." A pause. "I have very few people around me who simply—" He stopped. "Who simply what?" she asked. "Who act," he said, "without calculating what the action is worth to them first." The fire in the library hearth was low, its coals orange-gray, and the room smelled of pine and old paper. And Cora sat with Finn's bond document in her hands and looked at the Alpha King and understood, slowly, what he was not quite saying. "I am a human waitress from a border town," she said carefully, "with no pack, no rank, No political currency of any kind. Yes, he said. That is not a recommendation. I know what it is, he said. It is also what makes you the only person in this building whose motives I can read clearly. She studied him. He studied her back. The morning light moved slightly as a cloud passed outside, and the room shifted from amber to gray and back. What are you asking? She said. He reached into the inside of his leather vest and produced a second document. This one sealed, the wax unbroken, the veil emblem pressed into it. He set it on the table beside her chair, next to Finn's bond papers. I am asking you to stay, he said. Not as a guest recovering from injury, not as a woman I owe a debt to, though I do. He met her eyes directly. As my wife. The library was very quiet. I understand, he said, before she could speak, that this is not a small thing to ask. I understand that you have no reason to trust the institution of marriage, or the word of an alpha, or the judgment of a man you have known for 11 days. I am not asking you to trust any of those things. A pause. I am asking you to consider a proposal that I am making with full knowledge of what it means, and full intention of honoring it. Cora looked at the sealed document. She looked at the fire. She looked at the man across from her, at the lines of exhaustion still present beneath the composure, at the scar, at the eyes that gave very little away, but gave it consistently and honestly, when they gave anything at all. Why? She asked. The same question she had asked over dinner. The honest question. He was quiet for a moment that felt considered rather than uncertain. Because my mother is alive, he said. Because of who you are, and not what you are. Because this kingdom needs something at its center that is not calculating its own advantage. He paused. And because... Another pause, shorter, the kind that suggested the words that followed had not been rehearsed. I have not been able to stop thinking about a woman who stepped in front of 4 bullets for a stranger, and I find I would like to know what else she is capable of, and I would like to have the time to find out properly. Something moved in her chest. She pressed it down, not because it was unwelcome, but because she did not entirely trust it yet. This warmth that had been building in careful increments across 11 days of quiet meals and deliberate attention. She had been warm before, and discovered the warmth was conditional. She had been seen before, and discovered the seeing had a purpose other than her. She looked at him across the library chairs and thought, I don't know you. And thought, but I have watched you for 11 days, and everything I have seen has been the same thing. And people who are performing goodness do not perform it consistently when they believe no one is particularly watching. I need time, she said. Yes, he said immediately. No hesitation, no adjustment of expression, no pressure in any form. Just yes, as though it were the most obvious answer. And I need... She stopped, and then continued, because she had decided to be exactly as honest with him as he had been with her. I need to understand what happened to the people who tried to kill your mother, not just Edric Vane, the full picture. If I am to be part of this... She gestured slightly. The library, the castle, everything. I need to understand what I am part of. He looked at her for a long moment. I will tell you everything, he said. If that is what you need, I will tell you all of it. That's what I need, she said. He nodded and leaned back slightly in the chair and began to speak. He told her over the course of 2 hours and a pot of tea that a servant brought, and neither of them acknowledged. He told her about Edric Vane and the Eastern Territories and the slow accumulation of grievance and ambition that had built over 11 years of council service into something that looked like loyalty and functioned as its opposite. He told her about the 3 allied council members who were under investigation, 2 of whom had already requested formal audience, the diplomatic word for surrender. He told her about Marin's letter, and Lady Vane, and the particular cruelty of betrayal by someone who had been a genuine friend for decades, before becoming something else. And then he told her something he had not told anyone outside his most trusted advisors, that Edric Vane had not acted alone in concept, only in execution, that the idea of removing Marin, of sending Caius into the kind of grief that unsteadies kings, had originated in a conversation between 3 Eastern lords 2 years ago. That one of those lords was Edric Vane, that the second had already died of other causes, that the third was still at large, his involvement not yet provable, his name currently known only to Caius and 2 others. Lord Perrin Ashford, he said quietly. Western border, oldest pack in the territory. He is careful and patient, and he has been both for 20 years, which is why there is not yet proof. His jaw tightened briefly. But there will be. Cora sat with her teacup cooling in her hands, and thought about a man who had spent 2 years constructing a plan to cause a king to collapse from the inside out by destroying what he loved most. Your mother, she said. My mother, he confirmed. She thought about Finn, about the debt bond, about the way cruelty so often disguised itself as legal procedure. Clean documents, broken seals, the machinery of legitimate authority used to accomplish what violence would have been too obvious to achieve. I want to help, she said. Not just as a wife in the formal sense. She set down the teacup. If you're going to tell me everything, and if I'm going to stay here, I want to be useful. I can read a room. I can read people. She looked at him directly. I have spent 3 years being invisible to men who thought I was only carrying plates, and I know things about how people behave when they think no one important is watching. He looked at her across the low table with the empty tea things between them, and something in his expression shifted. Not dramatically, not a sudden opening, but a deepening of the attention that was already there, as though something he had suspected had just been confirmed. I know, he said. That is also why I asked. Finn arrived on the 14th day, thin and winter-pale and taller than she remembered, and he stopped in the doorway of the room where she was waiting and looked at her for one terrible, suspended moment, as though he wasn't sure she was real. Then he crossed the room in 4 steps, and she stood up, and he held on with both arms, and she let him, her right hand against the back of his head, her left side still aching from shoulder to hip, and neither of them said anything at all for a long time. Caius had arranged for a room near hers. He did not come to meet Finn that day, giving them the hours without witnesses or obligation. She understood this as consideration so precise it felt almost architectural. A man who knew exactly how much space grief and relief needed, and built the room around it without being asked. That night, when Finn was finally sleeping, and the castle had gone quiet around her, Cora stood at the window of her room and looked at the courtyard below, and thought about the sealed document still on the table in the library, unread, waiting. She thought about her brother's face, about Marin's pale eyes over a morning teacup, about 4 shots fired in a narrow corridor, and the choice she had made without thinking because some choices don't require thought, only truth. She thought about a man who had not slept properly since Dawnmere. She went to the door and opened it, and found Caius in the corridor, not pacing, not waiting obviously, but standing near the window at the far end with his arms crossed and his eyes on the dark courtyard below, present in the way he was always present, steady and quiet and making no demands. He heard her door and turned. She looked at him across the corridor. Yes, she said. He was very still for a moment. Yes, she said again, more clearly. I will marry you. The winter water eyes held hers, and something moved in them that he allowed her to see. Not performance, not relief calculated for effect, but the real thing, brief and unguarded, and then contained again. All right, he said quietly. All right, she agreed. They stood in the corridor for a moment in the castle's nighttime silence, and the distance between them was not yet gone. But it was no longer the distance of strangers. It was the distance of people who had decided, with full knowledge of the risk, to close it. The wedding was not what she had expected. She had expected formality, a great hall filled with council members and pack lords, and the elaborate machinery of political ceremony, the kind of event designed more for witnesses than for the two people at its center. She had expected to feel like a document being signed, a strategic decision rendered visible, a human woman in borrowed finery standing beside a king who needed something she represented more than he needed her specifically. She had been wrong about most things before. She was willing to be wrong about this. Caius came to her the morning after the corridor and said quietly, over breakfast in the small dining room with Maren present and Finn still sleeping, "We can do this any way you prefer. Large ceremony, full council, formal pack blessing, or small." He paused. "I have a preference, but it is yours to decide." "What is your preference?" she asked. "Small," he said. Maren made no comment, but her pale eyes moved between them with an expression of someone who had been waiting a long time for something and was declining to celebrate prematurely. "Small," Cora said. It was done 3 days later in the castle's inner chapel, a room of cold stone and very old carved wood that smelled of beeswax and pine, and the accumulated prayers of several centuries. The witnesses were Maren, Finn, who had spent the preceding days eating everything the kitchen produced, and looking at Caius with the careful, suspicious assessment of a younger brother doing his sovereign duty, and 2 of Caius's most trusted commanders, men named Aldrich and Bryn, who had the particular weathered quality of people who had stood beside someone through long years and difficult things. Cora wore a dress of deep gray wool, simply cut, with a belt of dark leather. Her hair was braided and pinned, a small branch of winter jasmine tucked at the side that Maren had brought to her room that morning without comment, setting it on the dressing table and leaving without making anything of it. Caius wore dark leather and linen, no formal regalia, no crown, just himself. The pack elder who performed the ceremony was a small, ancient woman named Sifa, who had apparently known Caius since his childhood and addressed him throughout with a brisk familiarity that made Aldrich and Bryn carefully study the ceiling. She spoke the old words in the old language and then translated them plainly because Cora was not pack and deserved to understand what she was agreeing to. When it came to the vows, Caius spoke first. He looked at her directly, the way he always looked at things he was serious about, and said the formal words without stumbling, and then, departing from the formula she could tell by the slight shift in Seifa's expression, said, "I see what you are. I choose it. I will not stop choosing it." She held his gaze and said the formal words and then said, "I don't know everything yet, but I know enough, and I will learn the rest standing beside you." Seifa declared them bound in the old way and in the law of the Ashvale throne. Finn made a sound that he immediately turned into a cough. Maren was perfectly still in the way of someone exercising extraordinary self-control. When Caius took her hand, it was the first time he had touched her since the night in the corridor, a deliberate restraint she had noticed and understood as the same quality that made him pull out chairs and build rooms of space and say yes immediately when she asked for time. His hand was warm and certain around hers, and she felt the steadiness of it move through her like something she had been bracing against the cold without. The weeks that followed were a different kind of learning. She learned the castle the way she had learned the Silverstone Inn, by moving through it at odd hours, by watching how it functioned, by talking to the people who made it run and whom everyone else treated as furniture. She learned which council members were genuinely loyal, and which were performing loyalty for as long as performance seemed advantageous. She sat in 3 council sessions as Caius's wife, which she was entitled to do under pack law, and said nothing the first 2 times, only watched, and came home afterward and told Caius what she had observed. He listened with the particular quality of attention she had come to rely on, complete and quiet and missing nothing. "Lord Casson smiled at the wrong moment," she said, the evening after the second session, when you mentioned the Eastern Territory investigation, just for a second, before he composed himself. Not relief. Something else. Like a man who's decided his bet is going to pay. Caius was still for a moment. "Cassin is the third," he said. "The third what?" "The third lord from the original conversation 2 years ago." He looked at her. "The one whose involvement I couldn't yet prove." She thought about that smile. Brief and involuntary. The kind that escapes a man who is watching pieces move toward an outcome he wants. "He thinks the investigation is going badly for you," she said slowly. "He thinks you're losing ground." "I have been allowing him to think that," Caius said. "Deliberately. For 2 weeks." She stared at him. "You were waiting for him to move." "I was waiting for him to reveal himself." His jaw tightened slightly. "You just confirmed the timing." She sat with this for a moment. The idea that she had provided something genuinely useful, not decorative, not symbolic, but strategically real, settled in her chest with a weight that was unfamiliar and not unpleasant. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Caius said. "We let him move, and we are ready when he does." Lord Cassin moved on a cold morning 12 days later, and he moved badly. He called a formal council challenge, an ancient mechanism under pack law by which a council member could demand review of a king's fitness to rule, requiring a minimum of 5 council signatures to proceed. He had 4. He had spent those 12 days quietly seeking a 5th, which Caius had known because one of the 4 he had approached was Aldrich, who had come to Caius the same evening. The 5th signature never came. What came instead was Caius, in full formal council, setting before the assembled members 3 documents, 2 obtained through the Eastern Territory investigation, 1 provided by a source he did not name publicly, that traced the original conspiracy to its beginning. 2 years of planning. 3 lords. 1 objective. Cassin's face, when he understood that the net had been there long before he walked into it, was the face of a man discovering that the ground he had trusted was not ground at all. He was escorted from the council chamber before midday. His packlands were placed under Crown administration before nightfall. The formal charges were read publicly the following morning in the castle's great courtyard, in front of the full guard and the household, and a crowd of Ashvale citizens who had gathered because word moved through a city the way scent moved through forest. Faster than any official announcement. Cora stood at the upper window of the council wing and watched, Marin beside her, Finn on her other side. Below, Caius read the charges himself, which he did not have to do, and which no one in the courtyard missed the significance of. His voice carried clearly in the cold air, steady and precise, and when he finished there was a silence that lasted several seconds before something moved through the crowd. Not a cheer exactly. More the sound of collective breath released after long tension. "He reads them himself every time," Marin said quietly, beside her. "He always has. His father delegated. Caius never does." She paused. "He believes a king should be willing to speak the words he authorizes." Cora watched him in the courtyard below, in his dark leather and the winter light, and felt something she had been carefully not naming for weeks settle finally into a shape she could recognize. She loved him. She had not planned it. She had not rushed it. It had built the way real things built, slowly, with evidence, with the gradual accumulation of 10,000 small consistent truths until the weight of them became undeniable. She did not say this yet. She had learned that she and Caius both moved better when they let things arrive in their proper time. But she stopped bracing against it. That evening, Edric Vane was formally sentenced in a closed judicial session. His packlands were dissolved into Crown territory. His title was stripped. He was remanded to the northern holding fortress for a period of no less than 15 years. The sentence to be reviewed at its conclusion, under conditions he would not have the power to influence. Lady Vane, whose involvement had been complicity through silence rather than active conspiracy, was permitted to retire to her family's modest estate in the south under permanent surveillance. She sent Marin a letter that Marin read once and did not speak of again. Cassin received a harsher sentence, because his crime was not one of grievance, but of pure ambition. A man who had suffered no wrong, sought no justice, only wanted more than he had, and had decided that the surest path was someone else's destruction. 20 years. No review. The 3 Allied council members who had surrendered early received formal censure and reduced authority. 2 of them would spend the rest of their careers in a kind of political purgatory that was, Cora suspected, in some ways worse than formal punishment. Present but diminished, trusted by no one, required to watch the consequence of the choice they had almost made. When Caius came to find her that night, she was in the library again. In her chair by the window, the history of the Northern Territories open in her lap. She had been reading it properly this time, learning names and alliances and the geography of the world she now inhabited, because she had decided that understanding her world was not optional. He sat in the second chair and looked at her for a long moment. "It's done," he said. "I know," she said. "How do you feel?" he asked. She considered the question seriously, the way it deserved to be considered. She thought about Dawnmere, the narrow corridor, the cold floor, the smell of her own blood, and the weight of 4 shots fired at close range. She thought about waking up warm in a room she didn't recognize. She thought about Finn's face in a doorway, and Marin's jasmine branch on the dressing table, and a sealed document she had eventually opened and read in full, learning what she had agreed to, and finding she agreed to all of it. Like someone who finally put down something heavy, she said, and realized they're stronger than they thought. He looked at her with those winter water eyes, and what moved in them was the thing she had seen once before. Briefly, in a corridor, when she had said yes. Real and unguarded and then contained, but this time contained less quickly. This time he let her see it for a moment longer. He reached across the small table between the reading chairs and set his hand over hers, palm warm, grip certain. She turned her hand and held on. Spring came to Ash Vale, the way spring came to northern places, reluctantly at first, then all at once, as if ashamed of the delay. The snow retreated from the courtyard stones by degrees, and then one morning the inner garden showed green at the edges of the beds, and the air lost its mineral cold sharpness and became something softer. Finn had decided to stay. He had been offered his freedom and provision to go anywhere, and he had spent 2 weeks appearing to consider this, and then told Cora, with the matter-of-fact honesty of a 20-year-old who had not yet learned to dress his feelings in diplomatic clothing, that he wasn't going anywhere while she was here, and also that Aldrich had offered to teach him tracking, and also that the castle kitchen was better than anywhere he had ever eaten in his life, and those reasons were not in any particular order. She had laughed, really laughed, in a way she hadn't done in years, and he had looked at her with the slightly startled expression of someone realizing that his sister's laugh had become a rare thing that he intended to make less rare. Marin had begun, gradually, to take back the role she had abdicated during the years of her own careful political invisibility. She attended council now, as she was permitted to by tradition, and sat at the far end of the table with her pale eyes moving across the remaining members like weather. No one smiled at wrong moments anymore. On a morning in late spring, when the jasmine in the inner garden had opened and the smell of it drifted through the library windows, Caius found Cora in her usual chair and sat in his and said nothing for a while, which was comfortable now. The silence between them, the easy kind that belongs to people who have learned each other's rhythms. Then he said, "You changed things." She looked at him. "You changed things. You built the case. You set the trap. You read the charges yourself. You saw Casson smile," he said. "You confirmed the timing. You sat in 2 council sessions and said nothing, and came home and told me what I couldn't see from the front of the room." He paused. "I had advisors for years who never gave me that." She thought about the Silverstone Inn, the common room, the skill of watching from a position everyone assumed was insignificant. She thought about how long she had spent being invisible, and how invisibility, turned deliberately, could become the sharpest kind of sight. "I suppose," she said, "I had good training." He looked at her with that faint shift in expression that was his version of a smile, not wide, not performed, just a real thing that moved briefly across his face and meant more for being rare. "Luna," he said. It was the first time he had used the title. In the old pack language, it meant Moon Woman, Maid of the Alpha, the one whose judgment balanced the king's force. It was not a decorative title. It was a function. She felt it land in her chest and stay there. "That will take some getting used to," she said. "You have time," he said. "I know," she said. "We both do." Outside, the jasmine moved in the spring wind, and the courtyard below was full of ordinary life. Guards on their routes, servants crossing with baskets, Finn somewhere in the training yard making a poor job of something and laughing about it. The northern mountains were still white at the peaks, but the lower slopes had gone green, and the sky above Ashvale was the particular pale blue of a cold place, finally deciding to be warm. Cora looked at it all, the life she had not planned, in the place she had not imagined, beside the man she had not expected, and felt the last of the bracing leave her body. Not in a rush. Gently. The way snow melts when the season finally commits. She was not the woman who had tied her apron strings in a dim corridor and thought about bread. She was not the woman who had fallen on a cold floor with 4 bullets in her and thought, absurdly, about rye loaves. She was something new. Something built from all of that, but no longer defined by it. She was the Luna of Ashvale. She was Caius's wife. She was Finn's sister, and Marin's daughter by choice, and her own woman, in ways she was still discovering and intended to keep discovering for a long time. She was home. Not in the way of a place she had been born to. In the way of a place she had earned, through blood and clarity, and the particular courage of someone who acts without calculating the cost first, and who turns out, again and again, to be worth more than anyone expected. The jasmine moved in the garden below. The Alpha King of the Northern Reaches sat in the chair beside her, his hand warm over hers, and the story of how they arrived here, brutal and unlikely and improbable in every way that mattered, settled into its final shape, complete, certain, done.